yours. And Alanna, please.
So our next question is about biases. So as a minority media worker, are you aware of your biases when it comes to covering sensitive topics? And if so, how do you rein them in to keep things professional?
I think that I just want to echo something that Jerome said to the last question in terms of sustainability, right? So, we've seen over the last 2 decades at least this really interest in particularly the Black community and other communities of color as well. That question of sustainability is really, really at the core of this discussion. What does this look like over the next 10 years? When I got into this business in early 90s, 92, 93, I was just surrounded with 30, 40 journalists that looked just like me with the same aspirations. And of that class of journalists, as we moved all around the country, there's maybe 5 of us left still in the business. So the question of, I'm so glad to see all these young people on the call. Sustainability is really, really at the key of the discussion. So in terms of biases and how to rein those in, I think that, there's something that we do as Black journalists. I can speak for myself, and something that we learned coming into the business, and that's that whole notion of code switch. Yeah, and just being extremely professional, and we come in the door sort of checking those assumptions and going the extra mile to verify information with sourcing and things like that, because that's kind of what we have to do to work in these spaces. I don't think anyone would disagree on that. So checking biases, I think, is just at the core of particularly Black people working in media. That's just something that is almost a requirement. But as you grow in the business, right, having discussions with people, right, because like I said, Black people aren't just one clump, Hispanic people aren't just one clump, Arab people aren't just one clump of people. There's lots of story within our communities, and sort of getting at that, even checking biases that we come in, whether they be socioeconomic or how we grew up or how we were raised, et cetera. That's something that you're constantly doing in journalism. And it's really, really important in order to reach for the broader story of all of us. I think, Jerome, you're on mute.
I'm not going to unmute. I'm just going to sit here and listen to Nicole, because she's got it all. She's got every bit of it together. As far as bias, I think I'm going to work hard to not be my sarcastic self, as both Jessica and Alicia know I can be, lest someone mistake something I say for me really meaning it in a serious way. When it comes to bias, I think my first bias that I go into it with is, I think Nicole hit on this, is to take care of myself, right? Is to make sure that I'm not gonna step on a landmine. I'm not gonna do anything that is going to cause someone to jump on me for, doing something wrong or doing something the wrong way, which all of us know as, journalists of color, that's part of the package that we deal with, right? If I make mistake X and my white colleague makes mistake X, I'm going to bear the brunt of it. My white colleague is not. And so, I think that's something that I go into it with. I'm obviously older than most of you watching this. And so, I come from a place where, that's an important part of it. That idea of doing it well, being an example, And so I think, like Nicole, I have certain biases politically, economically, in other areas. But when it comes to telling the story, it's about, being factual about it, not making assumptions, not saying, oh, I think da 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 da, but finding out, knowing that's the case. And I think, like Nicole said, really talking to people to get an understanding of how they're involved, right? To get a sense of what they're thinking about, and how they're expressing themselves. And sometimes that's doing that off the record or behind the scenes, before put pen to paper, or whatever. That's an important part of doing the job, is getting a real sense of what's going on, so that you don't let, I want to put this the right way, you don't let too much of yourself bleed into the story. I take great pride in no one outside the newsroom, or no one outside my family, they don't know my political leaning. They don't know who I'm going to vote for. They don't know who I'm likely to vote for. And for me, that's important, because I don't want someone to say, well, obviously you're a libertarian. Obviously you're a socialist. Obviously you're a, whatever, right? For me, that's something that's important, that I'm not showing that bias. I think there are other things where I let a little more stuff out. Obviously, being African American, there's some things I let out a little more, but that's something I work on, constantly.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you for that.
for sharing that answer. I think that's very important for us to take away.
I have one other little thing about that, and biases. Just a little snippet to share. One of the major news events that I coordinated coverage of was the vote counting over at TCF in downtown Detroit after the presidential election. And yes, very charged environment, very racially polarized environment. And in those instances, as an editor, as a reporter, et cetera, what I recommend is I draw myself a square, and I'm drawing it now, right, on a piece of paper, and I write news in the middle of it, right? That's where I want to be. What is going on? Like everything else filtered out. What is going on? What happened? And then ask yourself the why. When you feel yourself in a really emotionally charged environment, stay as a journalist, staying in that basket of news is really, really important.
That is definitely so true. So thank you for sharing those pieces of information with us. While we were on the topic of biases, we did just want to take that conversation a little bit further in hearing more about your personal experiences. So what was the most controversial topic or event that you had to cover, and how did it shape you as a journalist?
Jerome, I'm going to let you take that one first.
Okay. I'm gonna use a little bit of a runway here. So I remember back when I was 12 or so, grew up on the west side of Detroit. And I remember, always been interested in news, hearing that the Nazis, the American Nazis, were considering marching down Woodward. And my first thought was, are those idiots crazy? And then my second thought was, all right, I'm going to get my slingshot, and my buddies and I are going to be just off of Woodward waiting for them. So there's an example of bias. Must have been, it was early 90s when Oklahoma City bombing took place. And after a little while, come to find out that the Michigan militia was involved in that. There were, some folks in the Thumb of Michigan that were involved in setting that up. And these Michigan militias sort of came to the forefront. They really got known. And I wound up covering, some of their events. And so besides not knowing what to expect, other than knowing there were not going to be a lot of reporters of color covering them, and to be frankly a bit concerned about my safety, I think much like what Nicole said, it's about getting out there, finding what they're saying, what they're talking about, and not me putting my ideas on them, right? So in the stories that I wrote about that, I'm not saying, well, these are some crazy folks, right? Here's what they say. Here's what they want to do. Here's what they're doing. And really leave it at that. I mean, because that was what I was there to report. But I think the one thing about that really stuck in my head at the time as a young reporter was they were very nice to me. They went out of their way to be nice to me and to, I think in a subtle way, ease my fear, right? Now, in my head now, whatever it is, 25 years later, I don't think it's because they wanted to invite me to join their club, but I do think they know that if they weren't making me feel comfortable, that might have an impact on the story that I would write. So they were very good at that. And I was not ever put at ease being a student of history, but at least, I felt like I could have a conversation. I could hear them. I could get what they were saying. The one other story I think that had a big effect on me, sort of dealing in this world of race, was the funeral of Rosa Parks. And that was a huge national, international story. The funeral was here in Detroit on the West Side. And I think, after doing the reporting on that and leading up to that and whatnot, I think it really said to me that, confirmed for me that someone who does not inherently have power, does not inherently have money, can have an impact, can make an impact on the country and on the world. And that part of our job as journalists is finding those people and covering them and telling their story. And that can have a real impact. Yes, President Trump, President Biden, President Obama, yes, obviously they have a lot of power, but people without those same titles can have some power as well.
Such good examples, really. Such great examples of things that have impacted us as journalists, but also our history, right? Which brings me to, it has to be for me, the coronavirus pandemic that we're currently living through. I think that working on the coordination of coverage of the pandemic and how it impacted every element of our lives for the free press has just been such a tremendous revelation, I would say. I thought we had done something, right, in terms of journalism and diversity, et cetera, and the pandemic and how it really, really insidiously targeted communities of color and impacted us in really insidious ways, and continues to do so. It's just been overwhelming, and it has helped me sort of reset priorities in terms of how important journalism is, and history is. One of the small things that came out of that vast coverage stream, whether it's, people getting help at hospitals, medical treatment, medical testing, who volunteers for the vaccine trials, all of these things look differently depending upon what culture you are and what your socioeconomic status is. And one of the small things, because at a certain point, it just was overwhelming in my mind. But looking at our coverage at the Free Press, one of the things we came up with as editors, just editing some of the content about all of the people who had passed away. Look at all of these beautiful Metro Detroiters, these fabulous Michiganders who have really, really contributed to their community. We brought back obits, right? So those stories that are not going to necessarily win you a Pulitzer Prize or whatever, but tell the story of a people. And that project we will remember. We have committed, the Free Press has committed, today was my last official day. The Free Press has committed to tell those stories for as long as the public approaches us to do so. So that type of commitment, it might not be that revelatory investigation, but it really gets at what we've lost as a community, right? And when you read those, you really learn something about yourself and who was here and who and how greatly communities have been and families have been impacted. So that's one thing. That is huge, the coronavirus. I can step back and give you a little something in my past life, as a fashion editor, as a traveling, fashion editor with the Detroit News and the Syracuse newspapers. Culture and race, it just kind of shows up. And the question is, as a journalist, what are you going to do about it? I think it was the mid 90s when Calvin Klein was really at the top of the design, universe, and everybody was talking about him, and everybody was wearing his clothing from, the streets to the opera kind of thing. And he rolled out a line that featured all white blonde models, right? So for me as a younger journalist and knowing how I shop and how my friends shop and what businesses we patronize, to me, that was jarring. And my question was, what's the messaging, right? Who's the consumer? What is he saying? And needless to say, I came back from the shows in New York with a little something different, than most reporters would have at that time, because it's all speaking to culture and messaging and all of that. And then I started to really lean in and pay attention and listen to what was being said about some of the models of color, Black models, Hispanic models, Asian models, about how their look sort of out talks the clothes, et cetera. You hear those conversations. I would hear those conversations among journalists. And to me, that was really, really very interesting and a thread to pull on. And that's something that, I pitched and wrote a lot about. You guys know Robin Gavon does that a lot, but she wasn't the only one, and there are more. But those types of things at that time, you had to fight for those types of stories, right? You had to really, really sell it and really, sell to your editors why it was significant and really come with the goods. But absolutely be open and be paying attention to how do these things, whatever it is, pandemic, fashion, movies, et cetera, impact communities, and which ones,
Thank you. So, from your stories, you both had chances and opportunities where you really went against the status quo. And we're no stranger to going against the status quo and being faced with backlash when we do that. So, tell me, what are some safety tips that you have for journalists who are reporting on controversial stories, even in field reporting and after when they get back to the newsroom, reporting and really taking care of themselves?
Do you want to go first, Nicole? I think I've got about 8 hours worth of an answer for that.
Okay. So are you speaking of taking care of yourself in terms of self-care or safety?
I'm specifically asking about safety, and I meant as in a environment where you have to protect yourself in the field, and then you also have to protect yourself when you get back to the newsroom. And I think that social media and just being in an online
Okay.
environment makes it so easy for that journalist to be accessible. So how can you protect yourselves?
So you have to really develop a very thick skin, right? And really understand how important you are to this business and how important your voice is to this business. We need you. Definitely protect your mental, right? As well as your physical self. But, if you have to step away from the reporting or step away from the conversations to gather yourself for 30 minutes, do so. I think that you guys, particularly, are facing such tremendous assault, and you're open on social media a lot more than I was as a reporter and even as an editor. I'm the type of person, I comb through all the comments on the stories that my reporters write. I comb through all of them because what I'm looking for are trends and sources, etc. And I've heard reporters say, I just can't do that. It's too combative, it feels assaultive, and it doesn't feel safe. So I would say definitely, protect your mental and live to fight another day. If something is getting contentious in your newsroom, step away. If you have to communicate with an editor that's you don't feel is supporting you, take 2 breaths, step away and write an email instead of a one-on-one conversation. I think it's really important for you to understand that what you do is vital. Your voice is important, and you need to have some type of longevity in the business. A lot of folks that started with me 20 plus years ago burned out. They fought and fought and fought and fought and really had to step away into other industries. They gave their time. I think it's harder probably for you guys because of social media and because the community there's so much input and opinion coming at you. So that little box that I talked about with news and journalism in the middle of it, create something like that for yourself, especially early on, starting out.
All right. Wow, wow. So much to unpack out of what Nicole was just talking about. I think that there is a duality in what she was just saying that I want to make sure that you don't miss. All right. Part one, you are important and you have to do what you have to do to preserve yourself, preserve your sanity, right? On one hand. On the other hand, many of the companies you work for think you are expendable. You are a cog, they can get rid of you and get another one of you, all right? And so I think we all have a moment where we are trying to balance those two ideas in our minds, right? It's harder to do when you're under a lot of pressure and things are going on and you're on deadline. But I think, like Nicole said, you do need to have a space where you can pull back and realize that you are important. And I'll talk about me for a minute. Um, I've had bosses who have wanted to fire me for one reason or another, and thankfully, I have not given them an opportunity to do so, right? Now, did I have a boss who every day I went into the station, I thought about setting his car on fire? Yes, yes, every single day. But did I outlast him? Yes, I outlasted him. And so, you've got to have this long-term mindset, right? That, what's your goal? What do you want to be doing? How are you going to get there? And stay on that, track as long as you can. Now, at some point, some people say, well, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do that. And that's fine. But if you still want to do what you set out to do at some point, you find a way to keep doing that, and it's really important. And that's why, as Nicole said, many people she started out with aren't in the business anymore, and same with me, and for good reason, right? For good reason. But that's something you really need to have in your mind early, that being a journalist and moving down the career path, it is not an easy thing. Well, if you're a person of color, it's especially not an easy thing. It can be easier if your uncle owns the newspaper, right? But that's not the case for most of us. And so you just have to have that mindset of, all right, I'm gonna put my shoulder down and I'm gonna go. I think the other thing is, I think, you need to be smart about it and sharp about it. Get yourself a mentor, someone like Nicole, someone like Alicia, who, when the stuff hits the fan and you don't know which way to go and how to deal with it, someone you can go to and talk to and say, help me through this, right? Help me through this. I think that's something that's very important too. I'll stop there because I forgot the question.
Absolutely. I totally agree with everything that Jerome said. In addition to get yourself a mentor, get yourself a circle in those newsrooms of people that support you, sounding boards, people that will talk you off the ledge, people that will talk you onto the front page of the paper. We all need that cheering squad. And I have to say, I've just been fortunate in journalism to have those people. I can call Alicia, Cassandra Spratling, several others who will give me that, oomph. Or, Erin Perry, I see her on here, that will even gut check you in terms of, are you overreacting, or possibly about to overreact. We all need that circle and that support. That support. I mean, recognize it as reporters, you are actually creating something. I say that the reporters, they're the talent, right? When I'm frustrated with reporters, I always keep a notebook by me. I write down a lot of stuff. Talent, right? Take care of the talent in Hollywood. The singers, the actresses, they're taken care of. I feel like we should treat reporters the same way, because they're the ones outward facing, going out there, getting the information, bringing it back, and creating something for the public. So it's really important to have that support.
Yes, thank you. That's very important. So you talked about how taking care of your mental. How do you mentally prepare for just a controversial situation? I know you mentioned the news box, but like going into something, how do you just get your mind in the right spot?
I'll jump in. I guess for me it is, depending on how much time there is, doing some research. I mean, for me, feeling like I'm prepared, feeling like I have the facts I need to ask good questions, feeling like I have facts and background to ask questions that maybe no one else is going to ask. Those are things that help, center me when I am, going into something, when I'm going to do an interview or something. I think something as simple as, if it's a breaking news story, just taking 30 seconds to do some deep breathing, right? That can help clear your head, and so that when you're running up to the mayor, go, "I was silent." Take that deep breath, you know, focus your mind on what you want to get out of the mayor, and ask the question. Those are just a couple things off the top of my head.
Yes. Preparation, I think, is key. Jerome's absolutely right. I write down everything. I write down questions. I write down research. I print things out. I read it over and highlight it if I have time, right? Breaking news, the same thing. Organizing your thoughts in your mind, even if you just write down one question and a couple of bullet points on follow up things that you want. Breathing is really important. Environment. Now that we're all working from home, environment is really important. Where are you working? What's the light like? What's the temperature like? Set yourself up for the win. And ask yourself, what do I need? If it's, and every reporter is different. I've had reporters call me on the way to an assignment as they're driving to just talk through, quickly. What are your expectations? When should I file? Blah, blah, blah. Even though we've had those conversations, some people have to get their nerves out in that way. I've had people text me during assignments just so that they get a little bit of give and take. So as a reporter, make sure you set yourself up in a position where you can win. Right? So whatever you need, make sure that you reach out and try to get that thing.
Well, I think I'll add one thing, and Nicole might have a better sense of this because of the beats that she's worked on. But I feel like also, if you're going to an event or a news conference or whatever, if you have a sense of the other reporters on the scene, that can help you, right? Because if you know Bob is going to go down this line, because he always goes down that line. If you know that Jane goes down this line because this is how she thinks and works, that helps you, because then you don't have to ask Bob's question, you don't have to ask Jane's question, because you're going to get that. But then you've got your question that you want to ask, and you can get something unique or what you need out of that. I'll just give you one of my little things. Being radio, it's a little different because I've got a recorder. But one of the things I was used to do, especially like at the auto show or somewhere where there were a lot of reporters, I would always wait until the very end, because the TV people are always in a rush. They've got to get on to the next story right away. I would wait till the end. Almost everyone else would clear out, and I could have a conversation. I could ask some questions that only I would get the answers to, because I wasn't in that same rush that I always think of the TV people, but that the TV people are.
That is such a great tip. That waiting out the crush is so important. I've even told reporters, well, here's the thing you do. You go home with the person. They're taking the bus, you take the bus. That type of thing, that patience, and it requires communication with your editor probably. And, like, there's a crush here, I can't get to the subject. I'd like to spend 45 extra minutes and try to get more of an interview. That's just really great advice. Paying attention to the other reporters and even learning from other reporters. I've actually emulated reporters I've seen. It's interesting because I was at the news at the time, and the fashion editor at the Free Press, she seemed to always be ready, whether it's Paris or New York or Italy, ready to go. ready to go. And I'm always schlepping with the big bag and, several different things, juggling recorders and, and I looked at her one day as we both got off a plane from Detroit to New York, and we're both trying to get to our hotels. And she just got there quicker than me because she was packed lighter and more concise, more organized. And I'm juggling things and I'm thinking, I'm not ready for prime time. From that point on, I'm like, wait a minute, what do I need to win, right? How light do I need to pack? What's the type of pencil and pad I need to carry that I can just flip it out? What type of pockets do I need? All the young ladies, I had a puffer coat on, but everyone else had on a trench coat because they could just reach in and grab their, notebook and pen. But that type of observation, don't be afraid to learn from everything around you. It will help.
So I know there's a lot of things going on during this time. So how do you guys keep yourself up to date with cultural preferences during this time?
Read, right? Read, connect with communities, have meaningful conversations, and observe. Read the comments to your stories. The stories where sometimes journalism, we think we're doing so great and we're servicing underrepresented communities. Look in the comments and see if those communities, affirm that coverage and what they're saying about it and how they define themselves, et cetera. So you have to really be open and read and not sensitive about it. That's one of the conversations I've had with reporters over the years, this need to be right about someone else's culture, gender, et cetera, right? It's not our job to be right? Asking the question, how do people see themselves and define themselves, and reflecting it in media, the first draft of history, that's our job. So that shaking off that need to be correct all the time, because culture, all of these things are moving, right? So we're going to miss some things. It's okay if we catch up. It's okay if we discover. It's okay if we learn, constantly learning. But it's really important to read as much as possible.
I would say I hope you wrote down every word that Nicole said, because that's it. You have to read, you have to consume that, and get a handle on it. Because the language we use changes and changes rapidly, and sometimes the way we describe groups changes. When I was born, on my birth certificate, it says Negro, because that is the word that was used to describe Blacks in 1965. And of course, that has changed, right? And that continues to change. I think a perfect example of this, and it doesn't deal with race, but it does deal with the language, was what happened on January 6th, right? Mob storms the Capitol. And I think, the first headline I wrote was something along the lines of, protesters, storm the Capitol. And after, I don't know, a half hour, I got a thing back. Some listener said, or someone online said, why are you calling them protesters? They're not protesters. They're da 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 da. And by the time I thought about that, insurrectionists came up, right? And I had to go and look that up because I knew what an insurrectionist was, but did the detail of that word properly fit what was going on? And I think, you need to be attuned to that, and you need to be able to react to that sort of quickly in the moment, because you don't want to overreact. You don't want to say, Trump Nazis attack the right. That's too far. But that's what we're talking about. But yeah, read, and that will give you a sense of where things are. Talk with people in the communities that you cover, because you want to know how they describe themselves and what is offensive to them, and those are important things to know. I think the one other thing that I think is important that we've both mentioned is you need to have a sense of history too, because that's going to provide some context for what is going on, some context for the words that you use. And you will see trends, you will see through lines, if you have a sense of history that you're going to miss if you don't have a sense of what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
Such a good point. Such a good point in terms of history. Really, really studying and familiarizing yourself with concepts. I think that I can offer the coronavirus and its initial, really early on, assault against the Black community, right? And how we saw people dying hundreds a day, in places like Detroit and New Orleans, and other majority Black cities. And a lot of the coverage that I saw, you're thankful for it, right? That someone is pointing out that, this virus is disproportionately impacting Black people, and they're saying it's because of pre-existing conditions like diabetes and obesity and all of the hypertension and all of these other things. But the history, right, on how we got here, right, how communities of color got to those places, and why this virus is so insidious, we didn't often get to that history sharing. We're coming back around when we're talking about the vaccine and how communities of color aren't really rushing at this point to run out and get the vaccine. Why is that? A lot of that has to do with how people of color have been treated by modern medicine, right? And experimented on, right? And not treated and tricked. The Tuskegee experiment comes up time and time again, but that's not the only thing. So just knowing that, gives you a talking point to an editor to dig a little bit deeper. It might not come up in every single story, right? Because you might not have the, inch count to unpack this whole historical thing, but, being informed by those things helps, and it'll help sort of shape where you look and the sources that you approach. So that history piece that Jerome mentioned is so very, very important.
So thank you for your responses. Both of you briefly spoke on history, and I just wanted to segue into, do you feel an obligation as a reporter to cover stories regarding your race or ethnic group because you feel like you have a larger sense of the history and knowledge of those subjects?
Yes. Yes. So I'm going to tell you a little story. My grandmother, my parents are I'm from New York, but both of my parents are from Alabama. My maternal grandmother is from Eufaula, Alabama. She was a bank teller, and she was a nursing assistant, and she ended up being a columnist for the Eufaula Tribune. Right. It was a small local paper in Eufaula. And it was a big deal when they asked her, a church lady, to be the columnist of Local Focus, is what they called it. And the reason why was because they had a white woman who was a longtime columnist in the town, and they felt like they weren't getting enough from the other part of town, which was the Black side of town. And what I learned, I was an undergrad at Tuskegee University and subsequently at graduate school, going back and forth while my grandmother was doing this column. I would often witness people coming to her back door and knocking on her door and coming in with their news, I would call it. They'd come in with maybe a funeral program or an envelope from a bill with names scrawled on it, um, pertinent dates, etc. And my grandmother would talk to them about who graduated from college, who graduated from high school, who got a promotion, etc. And she would take all this information down and hand it in to the editor. Having this small town have access to her in that way and have capture their significant events, right? Really over 4 years watching this and watching her call people and find out the correct spelling of the name of the person who passed away, the age, what they called him, etc. Some of these people were people who could not even really read and write well, right? That's our legacy. So absolutely, yes, I see myself as being born of that legacy, right? And I feel like from the very beginning, I had a duty to tell those stories and to make sure that we were seen, you know, and not just the Black community, but underrepresented communities in media. Media is so powerful, you guys, so powerful, and we need to be seen. It's the first draft of history. We need to be in that.
Wow, that was that was powerful. I think part of what I'll do is play the offbeat to what Nicole was just saying. I think it is about being connected to the community, and getting them to trust you. And I think that's really important, because if people trust you, they'll open up to you, they'll talk to you in real terms, not just platitudes, not just, oh, isn't the weather nice today? They'll really talk to you. And I think I really got a sense of that many years ago. I live in Northwest Detroit, and I'll give you the short version of the story. There was a police incident that happened next door, and middle of the night, I've never seen so many police cars, not for a state funeral, kind of roll up, and they took care of what was going on. And the next morning, I'm outdoors talking with 3 or 4 of my neighbors. We're all African American, and just trying to piece together what was going on, you know, because when it happened, like, you know, I've got my window cracked, I'm trying to hear, but you know, if 10 police cars drive down your street, you're not opening up the curtains and going, what's going on? That's not safe. But so we're trying to piece together what happened, and down the street rolls a Channel 7 truck, right? And we all looked at it, and all my neighbors ran into the house. And it struck me, right? Because I'm like, you guys are running from the media? And they know, that's what I do. And I had really think about that for a long time afterwards. And I stuck around and I talked to the reporter who I knew, and, you know, but that really said to me was a real illustration of the lack of trust, right? And we all know, we've all dealt with the fact that there are certain news organizations, certain reporters, they only go to certain neighborhoods when there's something bad to tell, right? And if there's a great story there, yeah, that's not, yeah, fine, whatever. But is there a triple homicide I can get to? And so having that trust, building that relationship when nothing is going on is really important, so that when something is going on, there's already a relationship there and people will trust you to tell those stories.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think that sourcing and just having conversations with people is a lost art. There have been reporters, notorious reporters in Metro Detroit. Hugh Granum is a photographer. He's in the Michigan Hall of Fame, Journalism Hall of Fame. And you could not go out on assignment with Hugh Granum and make it fast. No way. Because people would stop him. He would chit chat with people. He would smile. He would hug on people, etc. But he was one of the most deeply sourced journalists in this area. But it's because of the give and take, that cultivating relationships is something that was on display. Once I think we went out for a summer, weather is breaking story, and it took us all day to get back to the office. And, my editor was looking for me at the time, and, what happened? I said, I went out with Huey. Oh, okay. Like people really wanted to chat with him, and he actually gave people, that time, that eye contact, that discussion, so that when real news broke, he would be the photographer to send you the sources, call A, B, C, D. I mean, cultivating those relationships, and I know we're in a really fast-paced, demanding media time right now, but there's nothing like forming relationships and taking time with people.
And I'll just throw in one thing along that line, which is, when you're out there and you are talking to people and you are developing sources, you don't want to just take, right? So what Hugh did was he gave them time. He gave them an ear. He was listening to what they had to say. And we need to be able to do that, right? It's not just about, oh, hi, I've got 10 minutes. Tell me everything I need, and I'm going to leave you nothing. And then I'm going to leave and you won't ever see me again. It can't be that way and work well.
Right. Right.
Definitely. So you gave us some great information tonight. What would be your advice to young journalists covering race?
Dig in, right? I just covering race, right? What does that mean? Right. So race manifests itself in so many things, in education, in healthcare, in, popular culture, in movies, TV, etc. So dig in and chunk it up in breaking news, in housing, all of these things. I think that it's really kind of important not to paint it with a really broad brush, because some of those reports and stories are forgettable and not really impactful, and they don't capture. But what are you looking at? Sort of break it up. Is it the protest movement? Is it public health care? Is it education? Is it media messaging? I think that breaking it up a little bit is really important in order to have maximum impact. What I've seen in this business in terms of race, I think that in the I feel like, cycles, right? I really feel the need to come back to that and talk about that. Everyone was talking about covering race in the late 90s, early 2000s. Very popular, writing about race, lots of think pieces, the same thing you see today. But after a while, it was like, okay, media moved on. We did that. We shelved it. A lot of the people who specialized in that left the business for good reason, as Jerome Vaughn said, and we got away from it, and now we're back. Like this is brand new. And I'm really concerned as a media professional at this level with who's going to help sustain these questions and examine this going forward for a longer period of time. No community wants to feel like they're the little black dress, right? You know, we're maxi dresses, and then we're knee-length skirts, and we come in fashion in and out and in and out. You know, really, particularly in a place like Metro Detroit, right? Having that sustained eye on covering race and how that factors into all the beats is really something that's vital, I would say.
Yeah, I couldn't add much to what Nicole said. I mean, I think I've been working as a journalist for almost 30 years, and while there've been a handful of stories about race that I've covered, I mean, all that time is in Detroit, so it is infused in almost every story that I've done. Because if you're in Detroit, if you're in Metro Detroit, that is a part of the story to one degree or another, right? And so you need to keep your eyes open to that. You know, if what's an idea? So if there's a gas station and people are marching at the gas station, is that a function of race? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you know, it's probably in there somewhere. And so you just want to make sure you're thinking about those things and not just letting them gloss over. But it is an important part of where you live. I think I know people who live elsewhere, and it might not be an important part to the same degree. If you're living in Des Moines, Iowa, and you're a white reporter in Des Moines, Iowa, then race is not as much on your mind, right? There's not as much, what would the word be? You know, there aren't as many people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds in Des Moines. There is some of that. But here in Detroit, you know, this is one of the more diverse places in the country. And so that needs to be in how you're thinking about your reporting and a part of what you're doing.
Again, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and opinions on the questions that we had made for you guys. I definitely know I learned a lot, and I hopefully everyone else did too. At this time, we do want to open up the floor for our guests to ask any additional questions to ensure things run smoothly. Those of you who are familiar with the raise hand feature, please raise your hand if you have a question at this time, or if you aren't able to raise your hand, please drop your question into the chat so that it be made asked out loud. So I will wait till I see some hands and then call on the person to ask their question.
And while we're waiting, I just want to acknowledge when you talk about having people in your corner, we've had for showing up for Jerome and Nicole. Aaron Hill Perry was here a moment ago. We have two other NABJ members, Felicia Henderson, who retired from the Detroit News, and is now with hey Felicia, the Maynard Institute. She does something called Fault Lines, and I'm going to speak with her about maybe presenting that, letting so that she can let us as Black journalists know the training that she does in media organizations and what it is that they're addressing. And then Vince McCraw, I see Vince has his camera off. He's president of our local chapter. He is retired from the Detroit News as well. He's president of the local chapter of NABJ. So this is how people show up for you. These are the connections. I've known these four folks. Oh, I mean, probably 30 years at this point. So I just wanted to point that out while people were gathering their questions, and I'm gonna let you guys come up with your questions now.
Omar.
Hi. So obviously journalism as a whole needs more voices from people of color, but is there a particular beat or area of coverage that you often see getting it wrong because there is a lack of diverse voices?
I wouldn't say that there's a specific beat. There's just potential to get it wrong, right? When there are not diverse voices, and not just of culture, but also age, in the room, and having meaningful conversations, whether, no matter the beat. And the thing about working remotely, I think, that has been a benefit. I can speak specifically on my time at the Free Press. Having all that input, that access, right? So we work on teams, and when something like the January 6th insurrection happens, you're all watching it together and having dialogue together. So as an editor and a reporter, you're having that robust conversation together. And for us, it was a quick turn from protest headline, right, immediately to we're seeing something different. Whereas it might have taken other media institutions a little bit longer, but having everyone online and having that conversation, all together has helped, I think, and particularly in coverage of the pandemic. I have found it extremely, extremely beneficial. Like, there, police shootings, in Metro Detroit that have happened over the summer. Having younger people reach out to me and say, you know what, you're using the police as your primary source. Is that verified? That kind of thing, and having that come immediately. Whereas me, as someone older, that's just how we did it, and I can check my assumption and adjust quickly. So having that input, that collective input, has been really extremely, extremely beneficial. But if a diverse group of people are not at the table, right, or not in the space, things can go wrong really quickly. And I know we've all seen that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I don't think of it as beats where things are likely to go wrong. The way I think about it is, I think there are beats where we're not represented to the same degree. And I think that's really it. If you don't have a diverse group in the newsroom, a diverse newsroom, then you've got blind spots. And those blind spots can really show up. Not to pick on, any industry, any area of coverage, but the one that I've seen over the years, and I know there's a lot to be done left in that area, is automotive reporting, right? Because I did that for a number of years, and I'd go to news conferences, I'd go to events, and I'd be the only person of color in the room. And it's, yeah, I'm a Detroiter. I know something about cars, but it's not like I went to General Motors University or anything. It's something I got interested in, started reporting on, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's where the problem is when we're not represented in a certain area and a certain beat, then, mistakes could be made.
Noor.
Hi, my name is Noor, and I have a question about finding resources in like more or less represented areas or groups, especially during the pandemic. Like, for example, I remember once we were working on a story in the South End about finding students who don't have access to internet. And with everyone being on the internet right now, that's kind of important, and especially with groups like minority groups, they have less resources. So how do you reach those communities?
I'll just jump in. Yeah, I think the pandemic has really changed how we all do things, right? I know, there were many months where um, we had people we knew who were dying of the disease, and I was not sending my reporters out to interact with people because I didn't want my reporters to die. And we know more now than we did then. But for me, there's a puzzle called lateral thinking, right? Where they give you an answer and you've got to kind of figure out how to get to it. But if you look at it straight on, you can't figure it out. You have to kind of let your mind go sideways. So, you mentioned people who don't have internet. For me, then I think, all right, how, if that's important, and it is, how do they get to that? So, maybe talking to libraries, right, where they offer free internet, maybe talking to community organizations where they have free internet, and, kind of working backwards that way. For people in neighborhoods when you can't just go and camp in the neighborhood, which is, how I do it. I'd go to the neighborhood, see if you can find block clubs and work at it that way. That's just what comes to mind to me.
Right. I mean, and just to build on that, everybody is a source, right? So who's driving up to McDonald's and using the free Wi-Fi? Maybe, talking to one of the tellers in the drive-through, or, Starbucks, et cetera. Because, that observation and really sourcing everywhere you go is really, really important, particularly, in the pandemic. I don't know how many times I've said, we don't have eyes on it. We don't have eyes on it, because it was very, very difficult at the beginning. Working sources and finding out exactly what's going on, but talking to people, having conversations, combing through comments, asking 5 questions to get, a lead on one source. That's something that just has to be done. And it's not easy, and giving yourself the permission to spend some time on it. Just really recognizing that this is an extraordinary circumstance.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And I want to just chime in one thing. Nicole said a few times, and it just to reemphasize it. This idea, you got to get rid of this idea that every story can be reported, produced, gathered in half an hour, right? Your editors may want you to do that, but that's not always possible. And that's something that you kind of have to think about and massage with your editors. Sometimes it takes a while to get sources. And that's why, like Nicole said, if you're kind of sourcing constantly, then you've got, well, this is an old term, but you've got a Rolodex already that you can go to, right, on certain stories, because you've been building sources over X number of years.
And if you're busy, right, you can always say, you know what, I need more time on B. I'm going to give you A today, right? So that you can sort of buy yourself some time to really invest in some of the rich storytelling and rich reporting that you want to do.
I'm not currently seeing any hands up, but if anybody has an additional question, Minna?
Hi. So, thank you so much for doing this, for giving up your Friday night. I was just wondering, how do you deal with maybe like race-based imposter syndrome? So maybe if you are the only XY in the room, how do you deal with feeling like you belong?
Wow, that's a great question.
Wow.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Wow. Wow, belonging, right? So it's a really complex question, and it's not easily answered because it's extremely personal. From where I'm sitting, I think that what I do is try to center how important it is to elevate Black community voices, right? So then it becomes not about me, right, and feeling that I belong. What I've had to say to myself sometimes is, they need me here. They need me here. That's not always easy, and over the last 20 years, it has not been easy to acknowledge that and say, especially as a young reporter just coming into the business, but understanding that we need you in this business. We need your voice, we need your experience, we need your perspective, right? Whether we know we need it or not, we definitely need it. So make it more about, this is important, right? Telling a fuller story, and I'm helping to do that, is important.
Thank you.
I think I've got two halves of that story, two halves of the answer. I think one, I completely agree with Nicole. This idea for me of building bridges is important, not just as a journalist, but as a member of society, as a Metro Detroiter. Not to have things segregated, not to have two distinct countries, but to be one country. That's something that's very important to me. I think the other part of it, and maybe because I'm a guy, I have a little chip on my shoulder, and so when I go in a room and I see, I don't see anyone who looks like me in the room. Sometimes I get the mindset of, all right, let's do this, right? I got my job. I'm gonna come and do my job, and I'm gonna do my job better than you're gonna do your job. And that's just me and how I come at it. And I think Alicia especially might laugh at that, because I'm not a big competitive guy, right? But you put me in that situation, from my upbringing and my family upbringing, all that, I've got to show that I can do this job better than you, and I'm going to do this job better than you. And so that's kind of how it works for me.
Yeah, thank you. I think you don't need to like earn your spot. You've already got it, so just do it.
Thank you. Grace?
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, I'm Grace. Do you think journalism, like as a career, is promoted enough to the upcoming working generation? Like, I feel like lower grade, like elementary, middle, high school, like they don't promote it enough, especially to minorities. Like in high school, like for my like high school newspaper, I was the only Hispanic person. I don't think there was like one other Black person out of 50 people. And it was just like, we were trying to promote it so hard to like everyone, but it just like, I feel like it's not branched out enough, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just, being on this call with all of you guys, your program at Wayne State is just so amazing. And just realize that that's not the case all over the country. My hometown papers are the New York Times and Long Island Newsday. And I've never seen myself in either one of those publications. When they called, when the Newsday called, when my father passed away, he was a superintendent of the national park sites in Manhattan. It was like, oh my goodness, Newsday called, right? Because we are just not part of that community, right? In media. In Metro Detroit, it's different. You have a legacy of, your program, the news, the free press, the radio stations, etc., we see ourselves. So I definitely agree with you, Grace, that it's not so much promoted, particularly in other places, because we are a very small number of the people who are working in mainstream media. And as you leave and move around the country, you'll really realize how small our numbers are and how important we are. Though, now everyone's looking for us, right? Everyone's, recruiting and doing the things and that happened in the 60s. I think Jerome spoke to that, covering the insurgents then, the riots then, the rebellions. And it happened again this summer. We don't have enough people with enough diverse opinions in our newsrooms, right? It's up to us to sort of sustain that growth, and to encourage more young people that look like us to go into the business.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the reasons that it might not be encouraged or might not show up so much is that none of us are getting rich doing this, right?
Right.
You have kids and who they want to be. Well, they want to be football star, they want to be a basketball star, they want to be an engineer, they want to be a doctor. Those are sort of the things very young that they think of, and I think they think there's going to be wealth attached to that. That's not people's only motivation. But I think, that's not something we have, but I think what we have to do is be more explicit with younger folks about how we are, democracy does not exist without us.
Yes.
And that's something we've got to be very blunt about and explain that that's the case, and be very clear and very insistent about that. It's what we do is really important, and I think a lot of folks don't think it's really important. The one other thing I think I just want to throw out, Nicole was talking about the not seeing herself at the papers in New York. I think it's very much the case in public radio as well. I'll just tell a real short story. Many years ago, I applied for a job as a news director somewhere out of state, and was interested in the job, and was not too far from where my mom lives, and so I was really interested in it. And two things killed it for me. One, again, I would have been the only person at the station, not in the newsroom, at the station. I would have been the only one. But what really sealed it for me was, at the end, we're going through this whole thing, and they're sort of explaining the job duties, and they say, and on Friday evenings, we have our donors come in, and you'll be serving drinks to them behind the bar. And in my mind, this is how you got to train yourself not to say what goes in your mind. My mind was going, not a chance that I'm going to be serving somebody some drinks. And that was the end of it. So I didn't take that job. But you just got to be prepared for that kind of craziness. That was a paraphrasing of what I said in my head, by the way.
Well, thank you both so much for providing those insights and answering these additional questions. I just genuinely want to say thank you so much again just for participating. You really did provide us with so much knowledge tonight. I want to thank every member who came out and joined us tonight. It is so appreciative that you would give us your Friday night to learn more about how to be a better reporter. So I really do appreciate that. And before we leave out, I did just want to briefly definitely draw one last time attention to our speakers. If you can follow them on their social media pages, I think that would be great in keeping in contact of everything that they're doing, as well as following the Journalism Institute for Media Diversity on our various social media accounts, on Twitter and Instagram at Jim Wayne State, and at Facebook at WSU Jim. I put this into the chat a little bit earlier. We just had a quick poll to launch to see how you guys heard about our event tonight. Just a little bit curious to see the best ways to get the news out for our event. But just as we were taking this poll, again, I really love all the questions that was asked. And of course, the answers were so impactful in terms of how we were able to see and report on race effectively. So thank you so much. Please continue to keep up with us as we go out through our events. And again, have an amazing Friday night. Thank you. Any other words from Ms. Nails or our speakers?
I was busy saying, yay, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. And it very value added. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the invite. Definitely a pleasure.
Absolutely. And Alicia, anything for you anytime.
Yes, absolutely. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.